And Peter, the president is known for doing the weave, and that means he goes from one topic to another topic to another topic. He went, I think, for almost an hour before he actually started taking questions. Let me just play you some clips of a whole host of other issues that he talked about just a short time ago.
We're going to be changing the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America, which has a beautiful ring. We're going to try and have a policy where no windmills are being built. The windmills are driving the whales crazy, obviously. When you buy a faucet, no water comes out because they want to preserve. Even in areas that have so much water, you don't know what to do. It's called rain. It comes down from heaven. And they want to do, no water comes out of the shower. It goes drip, drip, drip. So what happens? You're in the shower 10 times as long.
There are some other, what I would think maybe more substantive issues that he talked about. And I want to thank your colleagues at the New York Times for doing a running list. He was threatening Denmark with tariffs unless it gives Greenland to the United States. He did a riff about how corrupt the FBI is, he says. He says if the hostages being held by Hamas are not released by the time he gets into office, all hell will break loose in the United States. He appeared to have confirmed an article that was in the Financial Times that he wants NATO members to commit to spending 5% of their economic output. He has been on NATO since he took office the first time. You fact-checked him on his repeated claim that Russia would never have invaded if he was president. Of course, Russia was already fighting in Ukraine. He threatened substantial tariffs on Mexico. I could go on. What are we to make of this? And what does it tell us about what we are going to be facing starting January 20th, if not already?
Yeah, I mean, this is the challenge of a Trump presidency, which is that he will get up there and speak for an hour and a half, and he'll say, you know, a variety of things that are, fall on the spectrum from very serious to kind of odd and hard to interpret, right? Drip, drip, drip. What are we talking about? Showers? Often he says, I don't think he said today, but he often gets into a riff about whether toilets are flushing strong enough, that kind of thing. He has this meandering, discursive, rambling style, and it's sometimes hard to keep track of what he is actually talking about. But in all of that, as muddled as it sometimes is a lot of serious stuff as well. What is the threat to the Middle East of all hell breaking loose if the hostages are not released by January 20th? What does that mean? What does he mean when he says that he would not rule out military force to take back the Panama Canal? Is he really now threatening war against an American ally to undo a treaty that the United States duly signed and ratified more than 4 decades ago? So it is hard to kind of make sense sometimes of these events because you have to sort out the stuff that really matters, the stuff that really could make a difference, the threats of tariffs and demands for more military spending by NATO and so on, from the sort of random stray voltage that comes out of his head about whales complaining about windmills.
Yeah, I think a couple of things are that sometimes he'll say things that are dismissed, even by people around him, as being a joke, and then he sticks with it. Greenland perhaps being one of those things. He also was critical of former President Carter as his body was being brought to Washington, D.C. to lie in state, not something you would obviously typically see in any previous administration. And Vaughn, I want to bring you back in because we also heard Trump threaten economic force against Canada. Tell us about that moment.
Right. It was Peter's great colleague, David Sanger of the New York Times, that opened up that line of questioning about Panama and Greenland specifically, and whether military force, economic coercion would be used to acquire both of those sovereign lands. And the president-elect, with quite a head turn, acknowledged that, yes, he would be open to military threats, force, coercion. That's where I asked specifically about Canada. I mean, over the last month, he has repeatedly suggested that Canada should be the 51st state, and I preemptively, with my question, asked if we were to work under the assumption that you are serious, sir, about making Canada a 51st state, would you use military force as well to acquire Canada? Because just earlier in the press conference, he acknowledged and suggested that Canada didn't have much of a military, even though they are a NATO ally, and They, of course, helped defend the United States in the aftermath of the September 11th attack. And he said that no, we would not use military force against Canada, but suggested that we would, the United States, use economic abilities to, and it's not clear, I want to be very clear about what economic means. Does that mean cutting off trade? Canada and Mexico are two largest trading partners, but essentially he suggested that we would be able to cut off the cash flow and damage their economy to the point where Canada is all but forced to concede the annexation or requirement by the United States. His quote in this was, because Canada and the United States, that would really be something. You get rid of that artificially drawn line. It's hard not to say, leaving Mar-a-Lago here just a few moments ago, Chris, that the headline coming out of this is not only openness to using military force against Panama and Greenland, but also a longtime ally of ours to the north, Donald Trump, suggesting that he would potentially be willing to try to cripple the economy in order to force our Canadian partners to cede to annexation with the United States.